Welcome to this afternoon's session, the last session for the conference on engaging people with conservation and restoration. We've heard throughout the conference about people taking action in the conservation and restoration sectors, about creating and measuring impact, and why it's so important that we are moving forwards in respectful partnership, recognising the self-determination of our First Nations peoples. We understand, as Rachel Gallagher said, that with great flora comes great responsibility. We've shared ideas, tools and new information to tackle the challenges we face now and into the future. And I can't help but feel so hopeful when I witness the wisdom, the dedication and the ongoing work of the people involved in this conference, even though some of the future scenarios we are presented with are challenging. When people speak about hope, they often invoke the words of author Rebecca Solnit, and I feel they are relevant here as we open the final session. Solnit says, "Hope is not like a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. I say it because hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. Because hope will shove you out the door. Hope calls for action, and action is impossible without hope." In this theme, as in Monday and Tuesday sessions, we're going to hear about people taking action, who've been shoved out the door by hope, or compelled to act to save our incredible biodiverse landscapes, or who just love our precious Australian flora. We'll also hear a personal story from our guest speaker about what to do when you're questioning your hope, and when our experiences and the environmental news we hear every day challenges us, both personally and professionally. Without further ado, I will introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Jonica Newby. Jonica is a science reporter, author, speaker, television presenter and director, best known for her 2 decades on ABC TV's weekly science program, Catalyst. She's twice won Australia's most prestigious science journalism award, the Eureka Prize, and is a recipient of a World TV Award. Originally trained as a vet, Jonica took her love of animals, biology, neuroscience and psychology into the field of science communication and published her first book, The Animal Attraction. In 2000, Jonica became a founding member of Catalyst. Since then, she's reported on everything from nanotechnology to battery-powered homes and the emotional lives of dogs. She even jumped out of a plane to demonstrate how parts of our brain shut down during danger. But her own brain almost shut down when researching what global warming will do to the snow country she loves. Jonica was plummeted into a personal reckoning with climate grief. Her new book is a result of the quest she undertook during the bushfires of 2019-2020. Welcome, Jonica.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, fair warning, everyone. My talk emotions. Can you all hear me? Is the mic working? Check the audio first. Do I stand back here?
Sorry.
Working?
Yeah.
Plan B. We turn this one on. Place that if your marriage broke down, you might go and run away to. What I call your heart place. Now, we all have these heart places, many of us more than one, but not many. In fact, it's so fascinating that we seem to fall in love with places like we do people. Different people love different places. Some of us are connected through tens of thousands of years of heritage. Others fall in love as an adult, like I have with one of my places. So I'll show you one of the first photos, if I may. This is one of my heart places. Does anyone know where this is? Oh, come on. I can't believe there are no skiers here. This was Thredbo last year. I took this photo myself. Can I see the next one? So this is the Snowy Mountains. Look at this giant crayfish monster. To me, it's like an ancient guardian of the snow. And the final one, please. And this is me, what I look like when I'm out there, just absolutely full of joy. And by the way, it's not an accident on the photo. That little smiley face is actually on the tree. Anyway, I'll get you to turn those off. Thank you. Yeah, so it is funny the way we all fall in love with different places, like we do different people. And I don't think it's an accident. I've come to think that we actually share some of the same neurochemistry as human love. So I'm going to tell you about my love for snow because it sounds kind of counterintuitive when I tell you that I grew up in Perth. Sorry, it's a little hard to juggle the microphone and the book and the glasses. I knew this was going to add a little bit of extra challenge. Okay, so in my book, each of the chapters through a different emotion. And so this is grief, my love for snow, a tale of magic, adventure, love, despair, and the fight to save winter. I've always wondered why I fell for snow, because I grew up on a beach on the edge of a desert, about as far from snow as you can get. Perth, Western Australia, 3,000 kilometres from the nearest mountains. Frankly, 3,000 kilometres from just about anywhere. So you think I'd be a beach babe, and I was. But as a little girl gazing at the white sand and clear blue water of Cottesloe Beach, somehow it was another white landscape that was capturing my imagination. A land of dramatic peaks and frosted statues, of sleigh bells and dragons and high-stakes adventures and the ever-present possibility of magic. My mind was being captured by snow. Now, perhaps it's not so surprising because our children's stories are full of snow. I mean, you go through a cupboard and you're in frozen, sparkly Narnia. Think of Snow White, the Snow Queen. Frozen, one of the most popular films of all time. And then, of course, Lord of the Rings blew my tiny pre-adolescent mind, with its high-stakes adventures and stories of these small bands of friends trying to save the world from impossible darkness. And it was somehow set off by the majesty of these incredible mountains, because can you imagine Frodo in Fiji? It just doesn't have quite the same majesty, does it? So snow to me had come to represent magic and adventure. And this is the thing about our landscapes. They are part of our culture and our stories and our imagination, as well as our lived experience, as anyone who's a first Australian knows full well. So I grew up, became a science reporter, grounded in logic. And such fantasies, were put aside until about 15 years ago, I got to fall in love with a real snow place. That is Kunama Namaji, Australia's snowy mountains in the Narrogoo. And man, I fell hard. My fantasy world was back again. I was cyber stalking, internet stalking Thredbo when I wasn't there. Do any of you do this? You kind of just stalk your little heart place? Yeah, I see a few nods here. Your special beach or whatever on a really bad day. And to me, that ecosystem, do any of you work in that area? Yeah, a few of you, yeah. It's as special as the Great Barrier Reef, isn't it? It's so precious, you know. You see the wombats coming out of their little snow tunnels. There's pygmy possums hibernating up above the tree line under their rocks and their subnivean layer of snow. And of course, I'm biased, but the most beautiful of all eucalypts, the snow gums, you know, they twist and curve in these bonsai shapes, and their trunks are covered in jewel colours of gold and silver and red, and then they spread out these branches and the leaves coat with ice and they glitter in the sun like chandeliers. But they were separate, this magical world of mine and my real world of science reporting, until they began to clash. So it was 2017. I'd said a fond farewell to Catalyst, and I was having the holiday of a lifetime. I went to Japan for the first time. I was skiing powder for the first time. I was hanging out in onsens. I was hanging out with French ski instructors on holidays. Hang on a second. What is a French-Swiss ski instructor doing here on holidays? It's January, his busiest time of year. So I asked him, and he said, "I came to find good snow." So it turned out that Switzerland had had a green Christmas that year. And later that week, half the Great Barrier Reef died. And so I'm a science reporter. I knew what that meant. I knew the coral wasn't coming back, most of it. And I don't know why, magically, I thought snow would be spared from global warming. You know, what could be more vulnerable? But we do a bit of magical thinking, don't we? And I suddenly looked around at my magical kingdom and I thought, oh no, what if it comes here? And so when I got back to Australia, I couldn't concentrate on the things that had always interested me as a science reporter. You know, another story on keto diets. So instead, I spent a year off my own bat researching what was going to happen to the snow worldwide. I tried to develop a documentary on it. And somewhere during that year, I broke. I started to cry, and I cried quite a lot. But I wasn't the only one. You know, when I was talking to snow scientists in America, a couple of them broke down as well. And so that brought me to the middle of 2018, and I hit the skids. That's when I just hit a really profound depression, and it became the first time in my life that after about 3 weeks of that I went to my doctor and I sought antidepressants. I didn't have a word for it at the time, but I now have come to call this moment climate grief. It's like I call it, the other thing I call it is the personal tipping point, you know, where that thing, that intellectual abstract thing that you know about climate change suddenly becomes real and personal when you realise that it's something that's going to affect what you love. And I know I've talked about this in a few places. You're all biologists, you're all absolutely in the front line. You've probably hit this tipping point. A lot of audiences haven't necessarily. Many of you probably have, and if you hadn't before, you probably have in the fires. So what happened next for me? Well, I did the mature thing. I ran away. I just woke up soon after this antidepressant moment, and I just went, I've got to get out of here. And I went to the snow for 2 weeks, and I stayed 3 months. And I'd never done that before. And I switched off completely, complete detox. No news, didn't look at anything about climate change, didn't read my emails, didn't send an email, nothing. Just let the joy of living out there in this beautiful place be everything, and let nature heal everything that had got so raw and frayed, and it worked. It was absolutely magical. And at the time, I thought I was being a coward running away like that. But I've subsequently discovered that it's pretty much what the Australian Psychological Society prescribes for burnout. Because particularly young activists, I think, are very prone to burnout after a few years of trying to do their work. I think probably quite a few scientists will hit this point too, and sometimes you just got to get away. until it's less raw. But, you know, that's not going to last forever. That's just something you need to do. And so I came back from that, and I had to work on my own ways of getting through this confusing emotions. And one of the first things, sorry, I knew this would be a slight problem trying to juggle the handheld and this. So I had to start working on my own ways of getting through the grief. And one of the first things was to think more deeply about the clarifying nature of love versus fear. So fear is the most of the emotion that we most often hear about with climate change. And that's understandable. There are times where we should be really fearful. But the trouble is it's designed by evolution to spike and drop, spike and drop. You know, that's what it's there for. It's there for immediate threats. And the trouble with chronic fear as a long-term thing, it's actually not good for us. That's paralysing anxiety. But there are other emotions that evolved for a very different purpose. And preeminent amongst them, cliche, it's love. You know, it's designed to last a lifetime even, not always, but it can last a lifetime and it's good for us. And think about it. What exactly did love evolve to do? Well, it evolved to make us act to protect what we love. That, to me, is one of its main purposes. And that includes why we fall in love with natural places. Because protecting our homes, the plants, the animals, the landscapes that sustain us, was equally as important to our survival as protecting the people around us that we depend on. And it came to me how analogous getting a bad diagnosis about your heart place was to when my partner got cancer a few years ago, and he nearly died 3 times. The thing is, yes, at times I was terrified. Yes, at times I felt what's called anticipatory grief. That's a grief for something you're worried may happen but hasn't happened yet, and it's a very complex type of grief. But in that circumstance, you don't turn away in denial, do you? Not entirely. You're allowed to have moments of denial, that's fine. You ask yourself very simply, what would I do to save the one I love? And it's very clarifying. You do whatever you can, and then the outcome is out of your hands. And this is something that you can consider when you think about your own long-term actions on climate. Love is a much healthier and more sustainable motivator than fear, long-term. So, back to the question in the book. This was all an intensely private experience. I never actually expected to be talking about it. But early in 2019, I started having these conversations, actually with biologists in both cases, where they started talking about their feelings about watching the coral and so on. And I started to realise I wasn't the only one struggling with how to process all this. More and more of us were hitting that personal tipping point, and I suspect way more have hit it in the last 2 years with the fires and the floods. And the thing is, when you hit that personal tipping point where you see that it's here and it's going to affect things that you love, where do you go from there? And I don't mean what do you do about it, like lots of you will be talking about that here. I mean, how do you process it emotionally so that you don't end up with overwhelm or retreating into denial or despair or anger? And I just woke up one morning and went, oh, I think I need to write a book about this, not only to help myself, but for others who are struggling. And my overriding question was this: how do I live a good and happy life under the weight of this knowledge? And then I thought, well, maybe I should take inspiration from Lord of the Rings, you know, still a bit of a fantasist at heart. I'm a science reporter, but maybe I can go on a bit of a quest and I can ask wise people their advice. Expert psychologists, but also interesting people like Missy Higgins or Charlie Pickering, Mike Cannon-Brookes. And to add depth, each chapter would be framed around a different emotion, like love, anger, joy, humour, and courage. Best laid plans, right? That still happened. I met those people and they were wise. But I started this quest in October 2019. Remember that other world pre-2020? Does anyone actually remember that? And within weeks, our world started tilting as our country filled with fire. And our lives tumbled upside down until the world around us started resembling an apocalyptic film. And as our world tilted, so did my quest. And the stakes got higher and took us on an adventure we never imagined. And the book had to change because our world was no longer the same. So let me introduce you now to the wisdom of some of the characters that I met along the way. Let's pop in a time machine and travel all the way back to October 2019, the journey's beginning. One of the first things I was struggling was this, and we heard from Amelia on this. I was having a problem with hope. I don't know about you guys, but have any of you had moments in the last 5 to 10 years when your hopes have been dashed? Countries electing climate deniers, etc., gas-led recoveries. Yeah. I'd had my hopes on climate action so repeatedly dashed I was starting to mistrust hope itself. What was the point of hope, I'd wondered, if it left you this vulnerable to despair? And then I heard a podcast from the amazing Anna Rose. Do any of you know Anna Rose? Yeah, she's a bit of a background person, but she's an incredible change agent. She helped found the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, Farmers for Climate Action. She's helped with Vets for Climate Action. I'm a member of them. And she talked about courage, how the word itself, we've got a French teacher here, so I'll probably pronounce it wrongly, but how the word itself comes from the French, cœur, meaning heart or love, rage, meaning anger, courage, the fight we need to protect what we love. And for me, it was like a light bulb. Of course, I thought, this is what you draw on when your hopes are temporarily dashed. When your partner has cancer or you're fighting a war. When you're sitting on a beach or a roof waiting for the fire or the flood, hope isn't a lot of use right in that exact moment. But if you whisper this word to yourself and to others, courage, it makes you feel better and stronger already. And it's very, surprisingly, encouraging. You know, at the time when I was writing this, which was only 2 years ago, I finished it in the end of 2020. I thought courage was out of fashion, but look, the last 2 years have just brought it right back into our lives. How could you not be moved by the recent, images of people in the floods? Everyone who stood in the fires, there'll be people here who are in RFS and Victorian group that will have fought fires. And I find I whisper, in the early days of the pandemic, I whispered the word courage to myself, and it really kind of worked. And I whisper it to the TV, go on, courage, guys, you'll be right. It carries us through. And the other great thing about courage, about stepping forward to do something new, for example, is it's contagious. Others join in. Now, speaking of courage and stepping forward, let me now introduce you to the youngest characters I learnt from on my quest, the Castlemaine kids. Do any of you know about them, Castlemaine kids? Yeah. I'm gonna tell you a bit of a story. I'm gonna do another reading too. Well, this is such a joyful story, and it's a story about rage, the anger, the good kind, the kind that actually motivates you for action. So the Castlemaine kids had started the school strikes in Australia, and I knew that, so I wanted to interview them. What I didn't know is that they had this profound impact worldwide as well. And look, I'll just set the scene for the reading I'm about to do. I was trying to get hold of them, and I was self-funding all of this, so I went to Melbourne for 2 days, and I just happened to find one of the parents while I was there, and rang, and they said, oh yeah, you can come up at the end of the day. So I drove up to Castlemaine, got there about 6:30, literally had no time to say hello or anything, sat down with my recording equipment, stayed the night there and interviewed the kids. And you can hear in this, pretty much when I realised the story of the Castlemaine kids might be a little bit bigger than I think it is. So I'm asking them how the very first strike started, you know, the one back in November 2018. So, Harriet, I ask, oh, there were 3 kids, by the way. So, Harriet, I ask, how did it happen? And was it just you 3 standing out in front of the school going, I'm on strike? I can't help smiling. No, she slaps me down with a grin. So basically, that's what we were imagining. At the time, me and Malou in my class, we had 8 people. So we were like, if we go on strike, we can probably hopefully get at least 7 of the 8. And Callan can bring a couple of friends and this will be great. We'll have over 10 people. She laughs again. So we started planning it 2 weeks ahead. Then me and Malou were with her mum in Bendigo and we were talking to some of the Stop Adani people, and this awesome woman was like, that's actually a really great idea. I think it could go really far if we advertise it right. At this point, I interrupt because I'm struck by a possibility I hadn't thought of. I'd simply assumed the Castlemaine kids had picked up on other global strikes, but maybe not. Were there any big strikes internationally at that stage, or just Greta? I ask. No, just Greta, shrugs Harriet. Incredulous, I checked that I heard that right. So you guys, you saw Greta. She was the only one in the whole world striking as far as you knew. And you go, oh, we could do that. We could get all 10 of us. Yes, says Harriet impatiently. I'm so busy absorbing that I nearly miss her next bombshell. And she, the awesome woman, was like, I can put you in touch with the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. So we start planning it. Harriet laughs again and she was like, oh, I know you guys want to go on strike really soon, but if we postpone it a bit, we can help you set up some media, especially because neither me, Malou or Callum have a phone. Really? I say, agog. So we had no idea what to do with social media publicising. Am I really hearing that one of the world's biggest social movements was kicked along by 3 kids without a phone? That's hilarious, I splutter, that you started a social movement without social media. Yeah, it is a bit ironic, giggles Harriet. So they were like, I think you're underestimating how big this could be, but you need some help in terms of technology. The 3 kids had come up with the idea that they would conduct several local strikes each week in October and November 2018 and then invite Melbourne kids to turn up to a bigger strike at the end of November. And the first day we had 20 people and we were so excited. This is awesome, 20 people, that's more than double our class. The next day we had 30 people and we were like, whoa, mind-blowing speeds, what even is this? And then the next strike we had 50. And we were just astonished. At this rate, by November 30, we might get 100 people. That would be awesome, she laughs. And my sister kept on being like, Harriet, well, she has a phone, obviously. She's an adult. Harriet, I don't think you realise how big this is. Harriet rolls her eyes, acting out the exasperated sister. Nellie, I know I'm the one organising it. You know we might get 100 people. Now, if any of you remember back that far, 15,000 Australian kids marched that day, a further 5,000 worldwide. And those were the images that went around the world. And I've been told that it was those images of the Australian kids and the Australian marches that actually set the sort of the template for how these marches would be worldwide. So that by the following year, 7 million people marched for the climate. So that's what I call the power of 1 + 3. It makes 7 million, bit of maths there. Took one Swedish girl to really light the match, and then 3 Australian kids without a phone to help turn that match into a bonfire. And the result is 7 million people. Now, unfortunately, the pandemic stopped the protests in their tracks. But the legacy of that movement is absolutely still churning us through into a social tipping point now, because that's what it's all about, the social tipping point. Okay, the next surprise teacher character I stumbled upon in my quest was the divine singer-songwriter Missy Higgins. Anybody else like Missy Higgins? I just love her music, yes, little hands up at the back. And what a profound meeting that turned out to be. What a soulful person. And it's Missy who really clarified for me the transformative power of creativity in times of crisis. You see, I'd found out that Missy had a collapse into climate grief as profound as my own, and I wanted to know how she got through it. It turned out that what helped her eventually was to turn to creativity, and it was her husband actually who, as she was floundering, said to her, look, you've got to get through this the way you always do, by turning it into songs. So she ended up writing what I think are some of the most beautiful songs she's ever written on an album called Solastalgia. And when I played those songs, they actually do move me to tears. And like all great music, what it does is it channels emotions that I was having trouble expressing. And when we talked, Missy explained something really profound. She said she took all her pain and trauma and turned it into something beautiful for all of us to share. And in our sharing, we don't feel so alone. And I've thought about this a lot since, because first of all, creativity has been shown to be one of the best ways we have personally to process trauma. I mean, is there anyone here who took up some sort of new hobby or creative venture in the first days of the pandemic? Anyone? What did you end up doing? Knitting, yeah. Well, I did a bit of decoupage and cooking, yeah. It's most people did something. I was talking to a lady out here in the audience who was saying that, you know, after Malakuta, a lot of the kids ended up doing nesting boxes and painting them. You know, we turn to this stuff when we need to process stuff, and there's lots of research that shows it's actually really beneficial. It brings us together. But there's another crucial thing that we often forget. Times of great disruption can also be times of great innovation and creativity. We must remember this. In fact, crisis supercharges creativity. Think of the Second World War, radar and penicillin, you know, all within just a few years. In fact, back to Lord of the Rings, even that book itself, you know, it reminds me in some ways of what we're going through now, but it's no accident that it does, because these challenges that we face now, because that groundbreaking, beautiful, archetypal, epic fantasy came out of Tolkien's trauma of processing 2 world wars. And as the 2020s and the 2030s go on, we are going to see such possibilities for transformation. It is starting already. You can feel it, and you guys are so onto this. A lot of this will have been the topics of your talks here. Our determination is rising. Your determination is rising. I wasn't sure whether I was going to include this next bit, but I am going to, because it's a really important practical strategy, and I was talking with one of the people outside who does something similar to me. Missy also arranged a really important practical coping strategy for overwhelm with all the bad in the world, and this is something that I personally do all the time now, and that is to be a bit strategic and conscious about your news intake. Be careful about when you consume it. Limit it. By definition, the only thing that makes the main news bulletins is bad news. That's how it's defined. Fills you with cortisol and stress. And if you're one of those people who's particularly vulnerable, I think we all are in times of uncertainty, you can end up stewing in a bit of a soup of anxiety, right? So be mindful, and if not for you, for your kids, you know, for people around you, just keep a watch on people who are doom scrolling. One of the things I do is I do most of my news consumption in the mornings, not in the evenings, you know, when you want to just lighten up. Everyone has their own strategies, but just be mindful of it. It's called a healthy information diet. There's a term for it now. And it also means balancing it out with good news. Like, I now subscribe to a very simple email newsletter called Future Crunch, which only has good news, and it's really big good news. Like, not like a local, you know, council put solar on their council roof or something. It'll be like all of a South American country is about to be fully renewable in 3 years. You know, it's the kind of stuff that really inspires you and cheers you up. So look, I met loads more wise and inspiring people on this quest back in 2019. before the possibilities were shut down. I talked to Charlie Pickering, for example, and Craig Rucastle about why we evolved humour to deal with stress. And I'm really hoping one of you in Q&A asks me about the enchanted beer can, because that's part of the humour chapter, so a little hint there. I talked with psychologists about how to help our kids with climate overwhelm, heard from others on leadership. But that was back in that old world still, you know, pre the summer bushfires. I don't think any of us could have imagined quite how quickly reality would outstrip our imagination, and how intensely relevant these emotional strategies I was seeking would soon get, nor what Australians would soon be doing to try and save the landscapes we love. You see, my other heart place, apart from the snow, is South Coast, New South Wales. And ironically, while I was writing the very chapter about why, from an evolutionary point of view, we never think disaster can come for us, my own powers of denial came up and bit me on the bum as a 20,000-foot fire monster, straight out of some epic story, reared up and attacked my mum's town of Malakuta. So I'm going to do a bit of a reading from that. I've done this reading most of the time. I don't know how many of you actually, most places I've been that weren't so directly involved with the fires. Some of you may have been, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit triggering. I just want to warn you, it's a little bit vivid, but it's also kind of fun, crazy, mad. But you'll see why I like to read this in a second. So I went into Malakuta a few, is there anyone who does want to leave for a second? Yeah. Also, just on that, if anyone does have some PTSD or anything like that after the fires, I've got special sections in the book about that. I ended up having to go into that. And please, I'm going to be at the table after if anyone wants to come and talk to me about it. I've had a lot of advice from psychologists about this. But anyway, this isn't about this. This is actually, I call this Nicholas and the Disaster Movie Dash. So this is from Nicholas, who was stayed to defend. Not very many people in Malakuta did, because they were not going to be protected by the fire trucks or anything. Unexpectedly on his own, fortified with the desire to... and this is as the fire front hits. Unexpectedly on his own, fortified with the desire to protect the life he's built, Nicholas enters survival mode, running up and down the street, fighting spot fires with buckets of water, occasionally a hose. At one point, a power line came down across the road out in front of my house, and it all started sparking. This is Nicholas. Oh God, my hand is at my mouth again. And then everything was blazing behind me, and then everything in front of me was on fire as well. And I just thought, well, I can't go inside the house because all the houses are burning. And then I thought, well, if things get too bad, I'll just zip down to the beach on my bike and I'll kind of hide under the cliff face. That was my genius plan. Good one, I nod. It worked? Well, not really, he laughs. So I jumped on my bike and then I head to the beach. Like a scene from a movie, he pedals like the wind down a corridor of fire. All the houses ablaze, all the tea trees ablaze, flames flying four times their height, fireballs arcing overhead. It was just raging through the air, and I get there and there's a staircase that goes down to the beach, and that was on fire. And I ditched my bike and then I ran down the burning stairs, but the fire actually came down the cliff face and the beach was on fire, all the tussocks, and I saw them start burning down the beach and heading into town, and I was like, holy shit. And I couldn't go that way, and it was burning down the cliff face, so I ran to where the boat ramp is. I got up to the top, and my bike, it was burnt to a crisp, and then another front came through, but on the other side, and it went all the way down to the boat ramp, and I was kind of stuck in the middle then, so I had to run through the golf course. My jaw is on the floor, as Nicholas casually describes running from the flames, ending up doing a 2-kilometre high-speed loop around the back of the fire front to the other end of Terra Nova Drive, checking in on his father-in-law, then sprinting back to his end to pick up a bucket again, where, if anything, conditions are worse. There was fire everywhere. Pretty much every fence was on fire, and then the bushes, trees, houses, and then it kind of escalated. Houses would catch on fire, and then the next house would catch on fire. Everything was just chaos, really. Amid this sensory and emotional overload, with 10 houses burning around him, Nicholas's brain encodes a new knowledge, the dreadful keening sound a home makes just before it dies. it starts chuffing. It starts chuffing like it's burning on the inside. It starts chuffing and you can see it. The windows start to bend and then bam, the windows pop and it just explodes like a freaking bomb. And then the thought of in your head is like the animals, all the trees. Nicholas looks up grieving. It's like all the things, the beauty of this place has to offer is burning in front of you and it's out of your control, you know? There's nothing really. You're just a person with 2 buckets. Now, I am sorry if that's triggering you. It's a very different audience to what I normally read this to. I can see looking out. But there's a reason I read it, and it's because of the man with 2 buckets. Because when I wrote it, I didn't realise what a powerful metaphor that is for all of us in climate change. In the end, all of us, we're just a person with 2 buckets. That's all we can bring. And you know, that's fantastic. That's what we need to do. We bring our buckets. Now, some of us have much bigger buckets than others. Some of us are Mike Cannon Brooks and, you know, Twiggy Forrest, and we've got millions of dollars worth of buckets to throw at things, literally. Others, like me, not so much. But the secret to going forward is just to bring what you can. It's like asking yourself, what would I do to save the one I love? It's just whatever you can. Gandhi has this quote, which is, whatever you do will be insignificant, and yet it is essential that you do it. And you can't know what the outcome of your small action will be anyway. Maybe nothing. You may not save your house. Those 3 Castlemaine kids may have had, you know, little impact at all. They happened to. Nicholas happened to save his house with those 2 buckets and a whole lot of other houses beside. Which brings us into the 2020s. It's been an interesting couple of years, hasn't it? The fires eventually died down, but then we've had floods, a plague, a West Australian cyclone. If there's one, and a feeling there's a step change in the way we live now. And if there's one thing we understand now, it's that the possibility of major disruption is part of our lives. And amongst the chaos and confusion, a lot of good can come from disruption. And at the very least, it makes us all concentrate on what's meaningful, on what really matters in our lives. So what have I learned on this epic adventure we've all shared, that started out, in my case, with dreams of Lord of the Rings and ended up at times looking more like The Road? Actually, a lot. So many emotional strategies and ways of thinking about this, including the importance of making lots of jokes. I've mentioned some things already, like courage, how disruption supercharges creativity, the importance of a healthy information diet, bringing your buckets, and the overall importance of love as a motivator for action. And I can't cover everything that I explored, but I will honestly tell you that all these things really help, and I'm a hell of a lot more upbeat and optimistic and hopeful even than I was at Journey's beginning, even while still being a realist. But I want to finish with 2 big things that have been maybe the biggest, most important things that have helped me. So the first thing I've learned is that climate grief is to be welcomed. It actually honours what you love. Grief is the flip side of love. And while many people fear letting climate grief engulf them, that they'll get stuck there, in fact, the opposite happens. It's actually important, I've discovered, to let it flow through you if that is your emotional reaction. Everyone's different. I know you're not all in the same space. Because otherwise, though, you can get stuck in denial or overwhelm or toxic rage. But honouring what you love and being sad can also then be seen as a bounce point, like hitting rock bottom. It opens up the possibility of what's called post-trauma growth. And it can it can change you and leave you with a renewed sense of gratitude and purpose, determination to do what you can to save what you love, while accepting that the big picture's out of your control. And it's interesting that when I asked a range of psychologists about how best to help prepare our kids emotionally for this changing environment, It boiled down to a simple algorithm. So first is name and validate the emotion. Second, change what you can. Third, accept what you can't. So I'll just go through them quickly. So first, name and validate the emotion. You know, my publishers did not want me to put climate grief on the cover of the book. But the reason I did, because it's not very good for book sales, is because my purpose was not to sell 1 billion books. It was to actually get that term out there so that people have a label and a way of even thinking about their emotions. Because even things like anger and all those things, they're all parts of grief, right? Once you have a label for it, it's actually easier to let it sit in your brain and helps you process and helps you talk about it too, which is really important. I know Amelia and I talked about that quite a bit when we were talking about this talk in advance. So name and validate the emotion. Change what you can. This is the action part. This is what you're all doing already. If you feel powerfully about something, it's your body telling you you need to act to do something about it. That helps change the negative feeling to a positive. And finally, accept what you can't change. This is the tough one, especially for activists and people in the front line, which so many biologists are. Accepting uncertainty, sitting with pain if it comes, grieving when you need to. Grief doesn't finish, you just get better at it. And meanwhile, being even more appreciative of the now, of being in nature with friends, the joy of it all. I'm so much more joyful than I was actually before going through this process. It's like having a loved one with a cancer diagnosis. You relish the now. You do whatever you can to bring about the best possible future, but the outcome's out of your hands. As it happens with my partner, he's still alive. Like, you don't know what the outcome's going to be, and he's happily working away, probably making the science show on ABC radio as we speak. That's my partner, Robin Williams. And this leads me to possibly the most important and helpful emotional strategy of way of thinking I've found. It actually takes all that I've just mentioned and gives it a label, and that is the notion of active hope. Have any of you heard of this term? It's quite similar, again, to what Amelia was talking about in her introduction. Hope as an action, not a passive thing. So it's different to passive hope, and the clue is in the name. It comes from the philosopher Joanna Macy. It's something a lot of people referred me to. And basically she says, you use your grief for the world as a bounce point, a turning point to go forward with courage and enthusiasm. From there, she called it Drano for the soul. And then with eyes wide open, you hold 2 pictures of the future in your head. One is the worst, what can happen if we don't act. The other is the best possible future you can see from here. And then your gift of active hope is your action, how you contribute to creating the future you want to see. It's like bringing your small bucket. This is your gift. What you are doing is your gift of active hope. The other really big thing I learned didn't come from experts. It actually came from all of us. Believe it or not, when the chips are down, most of us are good. When we've been faced with scenes we thought we'd only see in movies, did we turn into the cannibals of post-apocalyptic novels? Did we run through the streets shouting and screaming and looting? No, we didn't. Now, I'm just going to put this out here. 10 to 20% of us are shits. Okay? I think we just have to accept that. If you think about a sociopathic, bell curve, there's going to be 10 to 20% of people who are at that top tail. They're going to be selfish and awful, and we mustn't let them distract us from the fact that 80% of people are actually overwhelmed in those circumstances by an urge to do something, to help, to lend a hand, to help a neighbour, to make a friend in distress laugh. Research has shown that in disasters, far from everyone looting, there's an overwhelming outpouring of giving, of generosity, gratitude, and compassion. Crisis can strengthen our so-called pro-social emotions. And all of this actually fits our evolution as a social species. Our evolutionary superpower has been our urge to cooperate, and we have all these special pro-social emotions that evolved to bring us, encourage us to come together. So if individuals can have post-trauma growth after life's disruptions, then so can whole societies. And I think here in Australia, this is where I put some of my active hope, or hope in general, I think the next generation may be even more compassionate and community-minded than ours has been. I honestly think that we will look back on 2020 as the beginning of a broad and necessary social tipping point in this country in particular. It's going to be messy, it's not going to be clear, but when we look back, we'll say this was when Australia changed and started really doing something. And that brings me to the pro-social emotion I think will be the most important to propel us forward. And that is pride. Now, pride gets a bit of a vexed reputation because unfortunately we use the same word to mean vanity. It's just a quirk of the English language. But what's the thing you say to people that you really love that brings you to tears? You say, I'm so proud of you. In fact, it's so precious, we keep it as a special word, given out for only the highest application or effort. Kid who finishes high school, another who goes out of the way to help others. When I burst into tears every time I saw a volunteer firefighter in 2020 and then the nurses and doctors after that, what I was feeling was pride in those amazing people who are just you and I doing right by our community, often at great cost. When we do right by our community, evolution has gifted us with this powerfully, emotionally bonding reward, pride. And with this enormous and exciting disruption and transition we are going through in the 2020s and 2030s, this is the emotion that will propel us forward, that is propelling us forward, that's propelling you forward. Pride in being part of the solution on climate change, of doing right by our community. If courage is what it takes to act to protect what we love, pride is what we get to feel for ourselves and others when we have acted. So, you know, I actually envy you guys. I'm just a reporter. My climate buckets really aren't that big, not these days. But you guys are doing it. You literally use buckets. I mean, you put seeds in them, you collect, you revegetate, you regenerate, you set aside lands for conservation. I mean, you are literally providing or trying to heal heart places for others, both human and non-human. So I'm frankly proud of all of you. So bring your buckets. Contribute your personal gift of active hope and take pride in being part of a grand narrative of change and renewal, helping create the future you want to see. And if you're ever struggling with the worth of what you're doing, this is big and we are small. Anchor yourself back in the clarity of that most powerful and primal of emotions, love, for your own heart places and your family and children. And you just ask, what would you do to protect what you love? Answer, whatever you can. So I'm going to take questions in a second, but thank you. So we have a few minutes for questions, and I think there are some online. Or is everyone just too stunned? Yes? Yes. Oh, hang on, there's a mic coming if you'd like to. Yeah. Yeah.
The sociopathic 10% is the sociopathic 10% that has power, because at the end of the day, you know, they've got invested interest, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but obviously they've got their interest. And we, in our line of work, obviously come across those all the time.
Yep.
And have our ways to deal with it.
Yeah.
I wonder how do you deal with it? Because I'm sure you must come across.
Oh, shout at the television and throw things.
No, but
Yeah.
in a serious way, because I mean, you're talking about courage, acceptance, you know.
Look, the reality is there's a limit to what we can do as individuals, and in some ways we have to encourage those from within, for example, I don't want to get political, but I will. The parties that have more of the sociopaths, or there are people with courage who are trying to take the fight to the sociopaths who are causing damage within organisations. We've got to help and encourage them. And there may be a limit to what we can do. I think, honestly, part of mine, you're not going to like this answer, I can't change what certain ministers or others do. So when they're really getting me down, is it helping anybody for me to get super depressed about that? I think that's the big thing. I think this is where it comes down to that personal, finding a way to just not spend all that time in toxic anger at the Putins of the fucking world, you know? We're allowed to hate them. We're allowed to feel all those feelings, but if it then just means we end up descending into powerless, toxic rage, we're not helping anyone. So I just come back to do what you can, make a joke about them if you can, quite seriously, and find your ways. If you've got one within your organisation, we had a sociopath who closed down Catalyst. 17, experienced science reporters all went. And what's done is done. They call it radical acceptance. This is another thing that some of the psychologists talk to me about. Like, if you spend all your time obsessing about the things you can't personally do a thing about, the only person that hurts is yourself, unfortunately. And I suppose understanding that these people, these blockers, are there is really important, to not letting that stop you do anything else or fall into despair. Does that make sense? Like, it's, unfortunately, the answer's more internal than it is external. The externality is you do what you can to try and change that dynamic. I don't know what's going to happen this year, but when I get really depressed about what's happening at the federal level, I look at what's happening at the state level and try to find hope or heroes within that. I know that's vexed, because I know with you guys, I know a hell of a lot. I read Winter Road. I mean, my friend wrote that. I don't know if any of you read that. A lot of the legislations have gone in the wrong direction, I know. Keep going. Keep going. Courage. Courage. That's when you need your courage.
Hi, Jonica, thank you for that. You mentioned in your speech an enchanted beer can. Can you?
Thank you.
delve
Yes.
into your
we need to finish on something slightly more cheerful. But yes, just to go back there, I was thinking that's actually when the things happen that you can't do anything about, you do what you can, and courage, courage, courage. It's a really good word for you and everyone else, and make a joke. So I've got a whole chapter on the importance of humour. And we underrate humour. We underrate it. But actually, again, look at what humour evolved for. Why do we laugh so readily? Why do a whole lot of ambulance people or RFS people out after a huge fire or whatever, why do they go back to base and make stupid black jokes? It's because laughter is actually one of our most powerfully evolved stress managing mechanisms, and laughter in a group. So what happens when we laugh together is that, first of all, our cortisol and all our stress hormones come down. And then the second thing that happens is that our oxytocin, which is the bonding chemical, goes up. So I actually asked everyone who'd been through a disaster, the first thing I asked them was, so what jokes have you been telling? And, you could see they were expecting something awful. I was going to make them cry. But actually, it was like, and then they'd tell me all the jokes, because they all had told jokes. It's our natural instinctive response to do when the shit hits the fan. So, look, it's not even that funny, but the enchanted beer can was was something Charlie Pickering told me about Black Saturday, and a mate of his had told him about this story. So there was a guy there, if you remember, quite a few of the guys stayed on their own to defend, which we now know is not a good idea. You need more than one person there. Anyway, so he had his buckets or whatever, and he's sitting there in Victoria, and as the fire comes over the hill, he goes, and he looks around his 2 buckets and he goes, you know what? If my time's up, I'm going to go with a beer in my hand. So he ignores his buckets, goes over to the fridge, gets out the fridge, gets his beer out, opens the BB, and as he does that, the wind changes and the fire goes away. So that's the enchanted beer can. Now, please, thank you, but I will be sitting outside. I've probably raised quite a few issues for different people. So please, I'm staying on so that anyone can come and talk to me after we finish and hopefully have a more in-depth conversation. So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
That was quite the quest, Jonica. Thank you for sharing so openly, and thank you for sharing what you learned from meeting so many diverse and wise people along the way. Jonica will stay on our panel and answer questions at the end of the session too, as well as being available outside. It is my immense pleasure now to introduce our next keynote speaker, Chantelle Doyle. Chantelle has wandered through the worlds of arts and science from childhood, simultaneously loving biology and theatre. She has experience working with an NRM group in Roma, Queensland, at Greening Australia, and as an ecological consultant. At the same time as these endeavours, she produced the stage musical Grease, studied at NIDA, and produced a weekly science radio show called Boiling Point. Chantelle is currently completing a PhD focused on personal and practitioner experiences of threatened plant translocation. So why do people get involved and stay involved in conservation projects? Drawing from interviews, responses to edutainment videos and podcasts, Chantelle will today take us through a multimedia experience so we can see and hear firsthand what works and what doesn't. Thanks, Chantelle.
Oh my goodness, what a beat up. Yeah, thanks Amelia, thank you Jonica. It's so nice to hear emotion being involved in these things. You know, we all love emotion, don't we? We're scientists. Which one am I pressing to go right? Does that move it? Yes. Yeah, I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm very happy to be with you all. This is a really safe space. I feel like you're all friends, so that's nice. You're going to have to trust me here because I'm doing something on engagement, and I just have to say no pressure. Like, come on, Sean, make it engaging, okay? I will try. When I said yes to doing this, I kind of got caught up for a couple of months in this term engagement, and then I just started going round and round in my head. What's engagement? Why are we engaging? What's this word? It doesn't make sense. So I'm going to ask you to get out your phones, please. You're going to scan a QR code for me, please. Yes, here we go. And you're going to answer for me what engagement is. For you, not a dictionary definition because we've all done those. You've got 3 questions to answer. While you're doing that, I'm going to give you some music to listen to, if it works. Now, this song was commissioned by the University of New South Wales for the Environment Recovery Project by a beautiful artist from Kangaroo Valley.
Fur trails and the byways, the only way to get anywhere. The smoke haze makes a dark day, fills your lungs with ash and despair, and the prayers of the people cut off by the fire line. Birds fly in dense clouds, don't look back, there's no delay. Wildlife crosses treacherous highways, gambling for
This should take you 37 to 45 seconds, and the music is timed, by the way. You have to trust me. I'm in complete control.
the fire line.
Okay, while you're finishing up, a little bit of learning. I guess anyone that knows me, I'm really big on mistakes. Maybe what have we done wrong? What can we do better? That beautiful song is one of two that had quite good media pickup. It was used on radio. Zoe is now doing some festivals with those two songs that we commissioned at UNSW with Mark Uwe, sorry, over there. And we missed the trick there. It would have been great to have a representative from the Environment Recovery Project with Zoe when she does these gigs to talk about ecology. But yeah, we missed that. But that's okay, next time, right? Okay, results? Nah, but later. Just keep it interesting. Okay, we're going to go back to the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, which a lot of people have talked about, but they haven't talked about it in this angle. There's 10 key goals, and I would argue of those 10, at least 9 involve engagement, probably all 10, but definitely 9. Why I pulled this up, though, is not really to talk about that, it's to talk about their outreach and communication strategy. And some terms there really stuck with me. They're trying to get engaged participants, they're looking for meaningful opportunities, they're looking for things that are specific to individual or group interests, motivations, capacity, loyalty. And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to pick up the missing middle. So not the early adopters, not the recalcitrant 20% that we're not going to bother with, the missing middle, which are the bulk of the change makers, the bulk of the people that can do something. And they have this quite nice little, I don't know, visual. It's a ladder of engagement, they call it, the UN. It starts at consumption and then goes through to sharing, affiliation and producing. I'm not really sure what they're on about there. But funding, obviously very important. And finally, shaping. When you're at the point that you've got so much investment from an individual or a group or a funding body that they are helping direct the progress. Types of engagement. This is what kind of caught me out, and I wonder if when you did that survey, it caught you out too. Yeah, engagement originally, I was like, yeah, on ground, land care, bush care, bio-blitzes, of course. Oh, I've gone too far, go back. But then we've got things like Natural History 2.0, I love that term, that's the citizen science platforms, policy and planning, decision matrix tools, does anyone work in this? And market-driven. Yeah, market-driven ecotourism, is that engagement? I would argue it is. 10 million volunteer hours since 1971 as what Earthwatch has done. Pretty good pickup, and that's working with research groups, on-ground groups all around the world. To help myself, I kind of put this engagement on a continuum of active through to passive or consumptive. Can sit anywhere. Another way to look at it is external versus intrinsically driven. That's Sterling's kind of metrics. And some of those examples might be education, curriculums, certification programs. I love that the Audubon Society has a sanctuary program for golf, working with golf courses around the world. I know somebody was very anti-golf courses, but they've got good habitat value. Social and emotional well-being, Jonica, really important. Ecotherapy, identity and cultural connectedness, the arts and storytelling. I guess if anyone's feeling a little bit overwhelmed, if you haven't heard of Lonely Conservationists, that's a really nice platform to get on and share your stories. I've written something for them myself, From My Pit of Despair. And marketing, fundraising. There were 506 advertisements in 2019 for people to be volunteering in the environment sector. So what about the literature? Because we are at a conference, I thought I'd do a little lit review. Any literature on this? There's a bit more, there's a bit more. In fact, there's a lot. There's a lot of literature, and this is why I kind of got a little bit overwhelmed with it. The takeaway from all this literature, though, is actually it draws on all of these fields. We're not just talking about conservation. We're talking about psychology, behaviour change, tourism, economic development, human rights. These are all the components of change, of engagement, of recognising individuals and groups. Why? I mean, you all know why. I think you know why, but I'll touch on it very briefly. Funding, yes, we need cash. Engagement is particularly important when we are, well, originally funding sources, state and federal government, national banks, things like that, but increasingly relying on corporate social responsibility funds, philanthropy, crowdfunding, and that means engagement. That means tapping in with individuals and groups and their motivations. But it's actually quite hard to access. I mean, the RED program, this is an old example, but a nice one, a $9.8 billion pledge program. Only 10% of it was privately or voluntarily contributed. So that's not much, and that's a very big organisation, big movement. Things like behaviour change, I guess some people are involved in that. Behaviour change, it's a bit confronting because you've got to be involved in psychology, you've got to do metrics, can you look at policy, can you look at scaling up? But this lovely example from TurtleSat, which I quite like. Does anyone use TurtleSat? Is anyone familiar with it? Yeah, nice, yeah. I didn't know this from TurtleSat. So TurtleSat is a citizen science platform focused originally on the Murray-Darling, looking at turtle sightings, nesting, predation, things like that. As you can see from all those records, it's gone further than the Murray-Darling. But a really nice side effect that they reported was behaviour change in users, where people were starting to self-report road awareness, changes in restoration techniques, and communication with other people in their network about turtles. And that wasn't deliberate, it was just, a nice little side effect. Final one, why do we want engagement? Kish. No, labour and savings. It's not a surprise, but the stewardship volunteers in King County, USA, in 1 year they had 57,000 hours of community engagement, volunteered labour. I think that's pretty impressive metrics. The voluntary sector in Australia is worth $17.3 billion. 6% of those volunteers are self-reported as working in the environment sector or the animal sector, so RSPCA and things like that. But it's still a big market. Okay, so that's context. From here, I'm going to have a little chat about some of my work. So I work in plant translocation research and do some science communication-y stuff as well. And as part of my research, I wanted to talk to practitioners about their experience of mitigation translocations and conservation translocations. Conservation translocations are mostly what we've been talking about here, but mitigation is big bickies, right? So that is basically under conditions of consent, developers, mining agencies, things like that have to pay for the grand privilege of moving said threatened species out of impact areas. So I spoke to, my aim was to speak to 60 practitioners. I've spoken to 44. So if anyone's done translocation and wants to talk to me, that would be great. But I'm going to show you the results from the 44 people I've spoken to about the cost. Please don't tweet this, because I learned early on that it's not a good idea to ask people for budgets. I just asked people for what was their rough estimate of how much it cost. I asked them two things: what was the costed budget, and then what was the in-kind uncosted contributions. Drum roll, block your ears, ready. This is what I got. Yeah, right? Just look at that for a minute. So conservation translocation budgets, this is self-reported. This is people's perception, and it was undercosted. I'm telling you right now, it was definitely undercosted. People were like, oh, it was a couple of $1,000s. I was like, how many hours? Well, probably about, I don't know, 500 hours, 10 people, $35 an hour. So I did some numbers for them. But yeah, you can see that conservation translocations are really quite heavily reliant on in-kind contributions, whereas the mitigation sector is quite well financed. And some of those in-kind contributions are from very early 1990s translocations. It doesn't really happen anymore. Okay. Do you want survey results? Do you want to see what you thought? Okay, this is rigged, I have to say, because I couldn't do it live. It was just going to be messy. This is rigged. I set this up beforehand, but you can get the live results from ANPC. But what we're looking at here is engaging people in conservation and restoration really focused on an on-ground. You know, we tend to think of it as on-ground, physical action, physical engagement. Is that always the case? I'm just here to kind of pose some questions. What about why people continue? And this harks back to what Jonica was saying. Desire to contribute, childhood connection. So these are intrinsic drivers, not really some extrinsic drivers like guilt, funding availability, tax offsets, requirements for your payments. And why they continue, again, the intrinsic drivers, but the social element comes up. Yeah, there's more attachment to the team. What about the literature? Wouldn't be a conference without this. This is an old paper, but I think it's very useful, and these are some 6 key drivers of volunteer engagement, and I think that they kind of go across the board. You can read those yourself, but I will pick out this ego protective, avoiding negative feelings. In that survey, guilt didn't really rank very highly, so you know there's not really avoidance of negative feelings here. And ego enhancement, personal growth, self-esteem, opportunities to learn, opportunities to feel good. Allender did quite a nice study looking at the same thing but specifically in the environment sector, and actually found very similar, a desire to help the environment, a desire to help the community, and a desire to learn. Retention, and this is a probably important takeaway, the biggest driver in retention was when people were having their primary motivation met. People may not know why they engage, but if their primary motivation has been met, they're more likely to continue. And to give you an example of someone that didn't meet primary motivations, but actually changed and did quite well, eBird. Anyone use eBird? Again, yeah, nice. I do not use eBird, so you're going to have to tell me if this is true, but this is what I took from their paper. So when they first set up eBird, there was very little growth, apart from early adopters. It was really lukewarm, didn't really love it. So they went back and they said, well, what are we doing wrong? And what they were doing, well, wrong, was they were looking at it through their lens, through their motivation, and their motivation was to collect data. But why would people be involved in eBird? Apparently, the birding community is quite competitive, and they like to compete with themselves and with other people, and they want the scoring metrics. So they went back and they put in scores, like how many points can you get, how good can you make it, and also they made it international so that you can take your points all around the world and, you know, be the, yeah, nods. Okay, good. I read it properly. And that has led to rapid and sustained growth, resulting in one of the biggest citizen science platforms in the world. Not too hard. All right, I got one more engagement thing for you coming up. These are the results from my interviews with the 44 practitioners, why they engage and why they continue. Before I quickly touch on those, I'm going to ask you to do something that's a tiny bit confronting, but you don't have to get up, you don't have to jump around, but I am going to ask you to close your eyes. I know, because I've got some audio that I want you to listen to, because sometimes we get kind of caught up in what we see. Going. Eyes closed, please.
I guess it's about 50% wanting to see the conservation thing happen, and the other 50% is just the fun of doing it and the people you meet and just generally liking to do it. Why am I still involved in the project? Because I started out in it. Once I start things, I sort of tend to hang in there.
I see the green coming through.
Yeah, if we don't do it, I don't think anybody's it's just gonna go back in that box. We've taken responsibility for this species. I don't want to measure it to its, extinction.
New shoots rise.
I think her enthusiasm got to us. She was so keen and we could see her passion, and we felt we liked to help her.
You're on a voyage of discovery, really, with this plant. It was, what more could you want?
It makes a way.
For me, it has now started and catapulted me into areas that I never contemplated being involved in. I'm learning so much about the natural world around us.
There's no time for you to mourn.
Okay, that's it. Brent, do you mind fading that out if it hasn't? Yeah, thank you. Was that different for you, listening to what people say instead of me telling you? So yeah, 44 people I've asked that to and I've recorded, and I've cried a lot of the time because there's something really nice when you just listen to what people have to say. Some of the words that came out in these interviews were emotion-driven. I've attributed these because they work for me. Responsibility, love, care, protection. This is from volunteers, but also people that work as consultants, people that work in research, community. There was a really strong inspirational component. You know, people want excitement, adventure, opportunities to learn that I didn't realise was there. The social element, yes, people, like to socialise. And then I've called this a global element, particularly in some of the retirees. The idea of legacy came through a few times. What can we leave? How can I say goodbye and feel good about it? And wanting to be connected to something bigger. When I asked people why they continued, the same intrinsic drivers, the emotional drivers, team came through quite strongly as a social element. I'm part of a team now. And then this idea of feedback and results, they liked the feedback they were getting, and when they weren't getting feedback, they were less inclined to continue. And Alinda actually asked this in that same survey I mentioned before, and found out that they didn't want recognition in academic papers. They wanted feedback about how their contributions were being used in a format that they could relate to and they could understand. And I think Martin has a really good example of this, dropping off handwritten cards in people's letterboxes. A handwritten card was number one for the best form of recognition people appreciated, if any, but you can see that maybe they don't necessarily need it. They just want to know it's making a difference. I've talked a lot, whacked around a few theories. I've got something else to add into the mix here. Do you think we're overthinking it? I got some more audio, if it goes.
Hung around for so long. What made it such a successful program?
And the volunteer group's just there for a good time. You show them a good time, give them a bit of fun, explain what's going on, have goals which you can achieve. We're going to clear this by today. We're going to go back over that area. Oh, look how well it's going. Cheer everybody up. Get a terrific morning tea going.
I was going to say food.
Food, tremendously important. Yeah. The packet of cheap Arnott's biscuits is never going to do it. So we fairly quickly moved into, we everybody just bought something, and that's the glue that holds it together. Delicious food and fine coffee.
That's true, right? Yeah, good food, good coffee. That is Paul Ibbotson. He has been leading up the Alacasuarina Portuensis project for 20 plus years. And I would add, it's good leaders. Nobody mentioned this, but I'm certain of it. When he left, it got hard. And I think maybe a lot of you will recognise this. One individual, one key driver, one person keeping it together. But yeah, good food, good leader, good coffee, or tea, but coffee. Okay. I'm going to turn the lens on myself now briefly and critique what I've been doing, maybe what has and hasn't worked, just as an example of what you can do to yourselves. So thanks to the ANPC and also as part of my PhD, I've been working on a series of 7 videos, it was 8, but 7, called Plant Heroes, which are coming out of these 44 interviews. And it's my way of saying thank you for people for their time and communicating in a way that isn't necessarily academic publications. I've got videos and podcasts. So have a look at this few seconds of video. Have a think about maybe what my motivation for doing this was, what you thought I was trying to achieve, and then I'll tell you what response I got.
This is Pimelia spinescens, or the spiny rice flower. Occurring on the volcanic plains of Greater Melbourne, this vulnerable species has been moved more for developments in the past 23 years than any other species we know of. So you would think, after all this time, successfully relocating plants so that they survive and recruit would be a refined art. But as this story will show, success doesn't come easily, and someone needs to be checking.
It's so mysterious, isn't it? So my goal was actually to critique a mitigation translocation and look at some of the limitations. Like, they've been doing this for over 20 years, still hasn't worked that well. Feedback I got on YouTube, "Oh, great work, guys, you're saving the species." I was like, "Oh, I don't think I said that." And then, "Oh, can I have some seeds for my garden? I'd like to grow it." Okay, good. And then some other videos, some other responses was, "Oh, I've grown some of these. If the team's having trouble, I can give them some. I've got 1 million she oak, different species, but that's okay. In Romania, there's been an ecocide. Could we plant Wollemi pines there?" And one person actually provided the exact coordinates of the wild Wollemi population so that everybody could go and visit, which I've deleted, don't worry. It's okay, don't freak out, Tony. Okay, and I was kind of perplexed, but then I thought about it and I was like, what's the commonality on all of these responses? It's kind of like this. I feel like most people wanted to help, and that was unintended, but somehow I tapped into this, yeah, can I help? Can I do this? This is good, and that was nice. But actually, these videos and podcasts were made as a broadcast and a narrow cast, meaning very specific niche audience for practitioners. So I sent out a survey link to as many people as I possibly could to get their feedback on whether they thought I'd done an okay job. The reason I did this is when I spoke to those 44 people, I asked them would they listen to a podcast or a video and was it useful? Most of them said no, not videos. They're irrelevant, they're fluffy, they're not detailed enough. Podcast is good because it gives lots of technical information. I don't listen to them, but I know lots of people do, so I think that that's a better option. And these are the results from my survey. So wait, most people didn't really listen to the podcast. It was mostly the video, which is totally fine. This is why I asked. What I was really happy with was actually, I asked people how much they learnt, and it was a pretty good response, a lot or a little bit. And I'm happy with that. You might be interested to see there, I got 50 people click on the link I gave them, but only 36 and 38 of them gave me a result. And I only had 4 questions. It wasn't like, I timed it, I think it was like a minute. Anyway, that's fine. So I guess the takeaway from this is that, oh, sorry, too hard. When I asked people if they would watch more videos, they said, yeah, I would. And these are practitioners. They would watch more videos. Would they listen to more podcasts? Not so much. And that's okay. Like, I went quite heavy on the podcast. That's good. So my lesson is it probably pays to solicit feedback in a few different ways. If you want to have a look at my survey template, that's the QR code to give you some ideas of maybe setting it up. Apparently Qualtrics gave me a good score for my survey. But yeah, I think it's very important to get feedback because maybe we don't know what we really want. You can look at participation metrics, you can get direct feedback, you can have anonymous feedback, or you can have focus groups. Be careful with focus groups, I think. Some final questions to ask yourselves. And this is important. And this is turning the lens back on us, me. Why do you want to engage someone? Like, what's your motivation? And then who is the primary group or individual that you want to engage? And then it really needs to be prioritised around them. You can get too broad and completely miss the mark. And then come back and say how you're going to do it, try some different methods, look at feedbacks, find what hasn't worked. Accept that it's probably going to be messy and you've just got to keep changing it. And that's just people, probably. I don't know. That's just us. Down the bottom, there's some nice organisations that you might want to look at if you're interested in this kind of social science element. And then finally, this is my learning. It was a real gift for me to get people's time, some people in this room. And it's very important to be acknowledged. So I'm going to say to you, and I will cry because I have emotion, I see your work, I see your care, I see your resilience, your dedication and your generosity, and I would like to say to everybody in this room, thank you. Okay? It's important that we say thank you to each other. Thank you to my supervisors. Michael Lawrence Taylor does the videography if you are interested. He can help you. Released my last Plant Heroes yesterday with Maurizio. That's a bit exciting. You can look at it. Just came out yesterday. It's about my other PhD work. And I think that this word cloud is quite a nice way to end. That's just a random word cloud that came out when I put all of my audio into it. And I got this. Plants really change things. Very profound. Thank you.
At risk of also crying, I would add to what Chantelle has said and say I feel incredibly proud of my colleagues and the people who are doing this kind of work. Hugely proud. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Christine Allen. Christine completed a PhD in threatened flora translocations in the southwest of Western Australia in 2014. Since then, she's worked for the Western Australian Government and Greening Australia in both Perth and the ACT. Currently, Christine manages flora recovery projects across New South Wales with the Threatened Species Conservancy. Christine will talk today about the importance of citizen science in the recovery of communities and plants after fire. Thanks, Christine.
Afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country where I did this project, the Yuin Nation and the Gundagara country, and their ancestors past, present and emerging. So I have a story of hope, which is a great follow-on from Jonica's talk, and a little journey about people and plants and how we've been working together over the past summer. Okay, I'm going to continue with the audience interaction as this theme has brought people thinking and closing their eyes. So I'm going to give you a minute to stand up, shake your hands around. We've been sitting for 2.5 days, and talk to your neighbour about something that someone has told you when you're young or an adult that made you go, wow. So, or people working at home, just think about to yourself.
Well, they needed to fill out.
Yeah. In this session. Congratulations.
Well, yeah, no, it was
Thanks, everyone. That's awesome. We had a bit of chit-chat and everyone woke up.
Some good stories, that's all.
So I'll just let you know what made me go wow. LERPs. So when I was in high school, my science teacher told me, or told us about psyllids making the little sugary housing for themselves, and how you could actually eat them, and how it was a traditional tasty treat. So I was so excited. I went home, took my sisters out to the front yard eucalypt, and we all started tasting the LERPs, much to my parents' surprise. So why am I asking you all this? Because our organisation is all about making people go wow for threatened flora and fauna. We involve people, and people bring people along on the journey to empower people in the threatened flora and fauna recovery process. So we've got 2 missions. The first one is collaboration. We collaborate with a lot of different organisations. We have many partners in all of our work, academic and private and also government. And the second mission is to raise awareness about endangered or threatened flora and fauna, and also to bring people along on that journey on every step of the way. So we get involved in recovery action plans, for example, the pink-tailed worm lizard, which we've been doing in Victoria. We're also working on the bushfire recovery of butterflies in Malakuta, and that has had an amazing community response in the Malakuta area. And today I'm going to talk about one of our bushfire recovery for flora. So we're only a pretty new organisation from 2018. There's only 5 of us paid staff, and then a huge volunteer effort in our board. But we also have volunteers that come along on day trips with us surveying, up to week-long trips. I'll be heading out to Mildura in a few weeks with volunteers who come along for the whole time. We are also interested in the career steps of young undergraduates and moving them through the conservation journey. So we've had 3 internships over the past 2 years, and we're really keen to keep that going. And one intern is now a paid casual staff on our team. And we run lots of events. So we ran 20 events in the past 2 years, which is amazing for such a small organisation. So this project is a partnership with the Department of Planning and Environment. We couldn't have done it without the SOS team. And it was all about getting out to the post-fire areas of the South Coast and seeing what was there of 5 target species based on Rachel Gallagher's work. So, and then doing some germplasm collection where possible. So this work has been going probably over the past few months, over the summer. So the project aims was really to raise awareness about the regional biodiversity in this South Coast, New South Wales area. It was about engaging local communities and empowering them after such a devastation has happened on their doorstep, to get them coming along to the surveys and learning about what's coming up. And also to support the local citizen science groups. There's the Buttawang Citizen Science Group and the Atlas of Life Wilderness Citizen Science Groups, and they're very active. So we've been working with them to find volunteers and run different events. So I'll give you a little background to the 5 species that we worked on. So I'll start at the most northern species, that was Balascian longipes. So this is a vulnerable species found in different locations, but we were just working on the most northern populations in the Blue Mountains and Canangra Boyd in swampy areas. Then there's the Nerriga grevillea, Grevillea renwickiana, and that's found in a mix of private and national park lands around the Moreton National Park area. Oops. The Bombay Bossia, Bossia bombayensis. This is a really highly restricted species, only found on the Shoalhaven River in very small areas. The chef's cap coria, Coria bolenii, that's found in mostly state forest and national parks in northern areas around Bateman's Bay and all the way down to Eden in 2 sort of segregated spots. And the Bredbo gentian, Gentiana bredboensis, and Laura Canical had talked to you all about the tumultuous journey that species went on, but this funding will help with a bit of genetics and microhabitat requirements for this species. So I'll just go through a little bit of detail with about 3 of those species in terms of the surveys and the community engagement. So the Bombay Bossia, as I mentioned, on the Shoalhaven River. This is a picture of the Bombay Reserve before the fire. And that's it afterwards. So it was a very hot fire that destroyed everything, and that the local land care group had planted some of the Bombay Bossia before the fires, which all got destroyed. So the Bombay Bossia is generally located quite close to the edge, or sort of 5 metres up, so on that sandy bank. And it was a mix of sort of mostly burnt individuals and then a few mature individuals left. So Erica Roper from the SOS program had back in 2019 created a monitoring program for this species, and this year we went back to see what had happened and if those seedlings were still surviving. So that was an effort between Bombay Land Care and Upper Shoalhaven Land Care Group and ourselves, and we went out there to go and check on them, and luckily they're still doing really well. We're a bit concerned about some weed incursion into that burnt area, but they're growing really well and thriving in that area. And we were lucky enough, I was out with Erica in November last year just having a quick look, and we heard this popping noise as we were walking towards the mature unburnt plants, and we were right on time for the seed collection, and the pods were actually popping as we were walking through, so it was perfect timing. We were able to collect some really valuable seed for the remaining mature species, mature individuals. So this, I suppose the fire has really been a catalyst to bring different groups together, such as the Land Care, Water New South Wales, LLS, the SOS team and us, all working on an action plan for this species into the future. We're quite concerned about another fire coming through and those slow-growing seedlings not being able to get to the fruiting stage. So we're planning some weed control, some further surveys in the next few months. So the Nerriga grevillea, this is listed endangered in New South Wales. It's a bit of a weirdo species, that's for sure. It is mostly clonal. It reproduces by suckers mostly. Oh, yes, it definitely does actually. And past studies have shown there is eight genetically distinct individuals, and that's it. So it's a prostrate spreading grevillea that's located on private property and Moreton National Park. Moreton National Park was devastated in the fire. 99% of it was burnt. So we went back to those Moreton populations to check out what was happening. And we found huge mats of the grevillea. It was thriving, and the biggest mat was 9 hectares in area. So yeah, it's really enjoying that post-fire. And some of us were very lucky enough to see these infertile flowers flowering. Sometimes once per decade, this plant flowers. It doesn't produce seed, but it's got these sort of relict flowering attributes. And we found the ants were enjoying the nectar on those flowers there. And there's a photo of some of the great volunteers. And then there's the Nerriga community and some of the private landholders that SOS works with who alerted Erica to that flowering on their private property. And we also found the flowering in the post-burn area as well. The Chef's Cap Corio, this is the listed vulnerable in New South Wales. So I had a huge response from the South Coast volunteers about coming on a trip to survey this species. It was too many volunteers for me to handle. People were really keen to get out into those different state forests and also down at the Byamanga National Park, down near Bega. And so we were able to collaborate with the forestry ecologists to go out with them, as well as a number of volunteers, and then the local Indigenous ranger at Byamanga National Park, who also came out with us because we were all wondering what had happened to those plants because it's an obligate reseeder. And we were much delighted to find hundreds and hundreds of seedlings. There was some unburnt patches in Byamanga National Park, but then some populations were totally burnt, but the seedlings are coming back in their hundreds. And it was a bit concerning because the thickets of regeneration, we weren't sure if the seedlings were able to compete, but yeah, they're doing really well and yeah, surviving there. And some of those mature, unburnt individuals were producing flowers when we were out there. Oops, 1 minute, okay. And just a side note, the Eurobodalla Botanic Gardens was devastated by the fire. But in a show of resilience, they've rebuilt. They luckily didn't have their herbarium totally burnt, which is great. So they were excited to hear that I was working on the Coria with this group of volunteers, and they took me on a 2.5-hour tour to show me all the Coria-related things, because the Coria is their emblem for the Friends of Eurobodalla National Park. And they also used to make some Chef's Cap Coria tea towels and merchandise. That's how much they love it. So we'll be running an event with them in a few months' time. So I really encourage, I suppose, the use of volunteers in threatened flora recovery. I think they can be our eyes on the ground when we're not around. And then there's that sense of fulfilment and responsibility that they have and that they want to be involved. And then they're watching the recovery has created this sense of hope in the community. Particularly in the Bombay Bossia, we've brought these big groups of different land care groups together to all work for and it's that sense of pride of that species that only occurs there, and let's all work to recover it. And then there's the custodians of the species, and that's what we're really aiming for, to find these really enthusiastic people who become custodians. And Rachel Fowler wrote a great conversation article a few months ago about that importance of the grey army who really help do our work when our funding's up and down. They're there doing the work and letting us know how it's all going. And here's a tiny little video of the resilience of our volunteers. So this is what we're walking through to find the Chef's Cap Coria at times. The volunteers just wanted to keep going. I was like, okay, guys, let's turn back. It's too thick in here, but they wanted to keep going. And there's a bit of the beauty after the fire devastation. Thank you very much.
I'd now like to introduce John Delpratt as the final speaker for the conference today. John is an honorary fellow with the University of Melbourne, following a 25-year career as a lecturer and academic supervisor in horticulture, seed technology, and native grassy community restoration. John takes an active interest in grassland restoration theory and practice. He's going to talk to us today about restoring diverse native grassland in southwestern Victoria by direct seeding, a success story led by the Wundu Chatsworth Land Care Group. Thanks, John.
Sound check. How are we going? All right. Thank you. Well, it comes to this, folks. Congratulations on your persistence and thank you for staying. And we'll move into it. I wanted to tell a success story, and it's a success story which I'm self-judging, so I'll leave you to decide whether you agree. But I also found that when I looked at the program and found myself in an engaging with people program, or a session, that I did find a certain paradox in the topic. So we'll move on, but we'll address the paradox a little later in the piece. The area where I'm talking about, and yes, first of all, I would like to acknowledge the Eastern Maar. It is their land that we work on, and I acknowledge them, their elders. This is exactly what we all practice for. Yeah. Well, it's gone now, sorry. So I'm engaging with people and conservation and restoration. I want to tell a success story. This is not my success story. This is the success of the Warndoo Chatsworth Landcare Group. This was before I was directly involved that they started this process. I've been visiting Warndoo for 30 odd years. The special thing about Warndoo, and I'll return to that place in a moment, but the special thing about Warndoo and its district is that there are still remnants, particularly on roadsides, commons and cemeteries, of very high quality representatives of temperate grassland. And it's not only the richness of those communities, but it's also the abundance. We can find richness closer to Melbourne, but the sheer abundance of these species within these grasslands is what is, or these remnants, is what is so important to view and to be inspired by. Sorry. As I mentioned, I believe there's an underlying paradox in here, talking with an engaging type topic, but we'll get back to that one. First, let's talk about the success. So the large, well, it's come up on screen there as a soft yellow. That large area is, of course, the Victorian Volcanic Plain. It stretches from the west of Melbourne through to the border, and Warndoo rests pretty much in the last third, but it has a lovely location in that it's set on the Salt Creek, which drains Lake Bolac down to Hopkins River and into the ocean. It's one of the important eel pathways for the wonderful eel story down in that part of the world. But we straddle the Salt Creek, and we straddle therefore two land systems. One is the volcanic plain, heavy basaltic clays, and the other is the Dundas tableland system, which is a sedimentary system. So although the ground floor is very similar in both systems, and we straddle them, they are quite distinct. Generally speaking, these days at least, much more tree, the old red gums and things on the Dundas. Now, as many of you will be aware, the Western Plains grassland the native grasslands used to spread over that enormous area, both as pure grassland, savanna, and as creek lines and lakes, of course. But they exist now only as fragmented remnants, and often there's dispute as to which part of 1% actually exists in any sort of reasonable form. But beautifully represented in that area and elsewhere, but in that area in particular, and as I said, particularly in rural roadsides, which are 3-chain roads, so sort of analogous to the travelling stock reserves in New South Wales. Probably not as wide, but 3-chain, it gives you a bit to play with, and usually the road is offset to one side in particular, so we have these broad landscapes. And of course, both the temperate grassland of the VVP and the eucalypt woodlands, grassy woodlands, are listed under the EPCC Act as endangered species, as endangered communities. So that's a view of one of the fine remnants in that area. That's on the Chatsworth-Wycliffe Road. You can see there it's a wonderful landscape. You've got human activity at a very, very high and intense level. You've got the vast areas of canola or wheat in rotation. You've got the old sugar gum tree lines, which were probably sown back in the late 1800s by direct sowing, one of the very early examples of direct sowing. And in between, on these 3-chain roads, the opportunity at least for quite substantial remnant communities of very rich grassland. That's in early spring. You move through into colour and then into a grassy landscape after that. Just an example of the sort of abundance I'm talking about. So at a small scale, you can get very high abundance, and that is in fact the purple colour there is sun orchid, and there are certainly places where you can't walk safely without disturbing a sun orchid. And then later in the season, you have the themata, the kangaroo grass expresses itself. For those who have not yet caught up, themata is in fact the world's greatest plant, themata triandra in particular. It's not widely understood sometimes, but I'm working on it. But you can see that's late summer, early autumn. It's a beautiful landscape right through to there, particularly once the themata is expressing in large stands. But people have found alternate uses for these broad roadsides, and that has been at the cost of these remnants, at very, very high cost. Often, quite recently, in fact, much of that cropping has only really occurred in the last few decades. But it provides an opportunity for our particular style of restoration, because if we can reclaim those areas, then it gives us a very good starting point for full-blown restoration of these communities. I'd also say, these are very important socially. You know, these are done by the local farmers. They fund social activities such as football and netball and those sort of. So there is a deep social issue there as well, associated with reclaiming those areas for restoration. Other areas are a little easier to justify, areas which are just simply ploughed for fire safety, and those areas will often go over just to deep phalaris or other exotic pasture grasses and weeds, which are very, very prone to fire, much more so than our beautiful themata grasslands. The hero of the story is David Franklin. He's led land care out there for a very long time, first in the tree phases during the 80s and 90s, and now he's reformed the group, and we're doing grassland restoration. David worked with Paul Gibson-Roy throughout Paul's postdoc. He and Paul developed machinery for both sowing and preparing land preparation for large-scale restoration. He's a farmer in Nursham, just of Chatsworth, and just west of Rawndu, rather. And as I said, he's formed the focus of this sort of work in that area. In 2012, he reformed the land care group and decided to apply Paul's techniques at the local level. And they selected 1.25 hectares of roadside just near Rawndu that had been cropped for maybe 2 or 3 decades, and he applied those techniques of greater scalping and then direct sowing to re-establish a grassland community. I'd also acknowledge the support of the Moyne Shire in that as well, because they applied the mechanical aspects of it, the grading. The mix, he tells me, composed of about 30 species, and about 60% of those have reappeared on site. They've been recorded on site. Probably only a range of grasses and several daisies at any abundance. So there's still work to be done in developing techniques which provide better return on the seed we use, but those species are coming back. And in fact, at least 2 or 3 species are there that were not there in the sowing mix. So they have returned. Either they survived that period of cropping, or they have come back since then. And it's a bit hard to determine exactly at the moment which that is. That's the end result. That's a stretch of 350 metres of restored temperate grassland. As I said, rich in grass. Just now the themata is really beginning to express, and that is rapidly transitioning towards a themata grassland. Daisies are the very showy characters in that story, but there are other species in there as well. So that starts with a graded surface. We remove the weed and nutrient loads from the top and then sow into that surface with a complex seed mix, which is not refined down to individual species seed. We mulch it and sow, but we can track the content of that species by simple testing. By 2014, there is usually, by 1 year on, you've usually got a good cover of Brittlosperma, wallaby grasses, and they sort of more or less provide what you might call the nurse, loosely call the nurse crop for that restoration. But everything else pretty much is coming back at the same time. So there we have a photograph into that canopy, which shows at least 2 or 3 daisy species already well and truly established within there. That's about the time I was beginning to plan world grassland domination. He and I are on site there in 2 years after sowing. And by 2017, I'd joined the crew and we had won Delpratt funding to do a further 1.25 hectares, plus some other experimental work which involved planting. That provides us with a beautiful spring display there of particularly, as I said, strongly daisies. Close up there of the moss mat beginning to redevelop and the sort of diversity we're getting in that small scale. And included there, for those with sharp eyes, is Drosera hookeri, and that's come back onto site. Well, it's on the site. Whether that has come back or whether it is just something that has managed to get through that cropping phase, we're not sure, but at this stage. And again, the finished site in 2021. This has allowed us to get funding. We've had workshops, we've had field days, so all of those sort of things that you do when you've got a bit of success going your way. Large crowds, by 2 or 3 years in, we were getting quite large crowds out there to have a look at what we're doing, to listen to what we're doing. But as I said, I'm in this session that talks about engaging with people. Our techniques do not necessarily depend heavily on individuals, they depend heavily on individuals, but not so much on people because they're broad scale and other than for seed collection and maybe some management of the seed production area, which we also have, they don't invite sort of large community activities. So we've been able to achieve those, the on-site success. We've had well-attended workshops and field days. We had good events during COVID. And we've got growing awareness amongst a range of authorities that this can be done, it is successful, and it is very, very scalable once you have the resources. But I did promise you a paradox, so if I can just have a moment. Sorry, I always do this. That's an aerial view of sort of the general site. So what we can see there is an extensive and very, very high quality remnant which runs at right angles to the site. We've got the 2013 restoration, we've got the 2019 restoration, and foreshortening there doesn't do it justice. It's the same size as the initial. And then, but beyond that, we have the annual cropping, which extends for a further 10k, and after that you get into ploughing and just general sort of rubbish. There are some good sites up there, but primarily it's now damaged and needs restoring. So there's 10k of that immediately adjacent to where we're working. We've not managed to engage with the local community at any very good level, so we're not planting trees on their property, so they're not immediately engaging with us. They've told us not to go any further into their cropping, thanks very much. So we've moved on to other types of projects now where we're reconnecting remnants and using our techniques to get rid of the intervening weedy areas. We haven't yet successfully connected with the traditional owners. And I think we have this in common with a lot of other groups as well. So I think I've learned a lot from this conference about those sort of processes and where the opportunities might apply. And I'm thankful to Amos and Nathan as well for their presentations there. Much more to be done. Sorry, I have one. Yeah, I do want to show that one. One of the heroes is, in fact, the Microceros group, and we have relocated Microceros walteri, which is what I would call the true Murnong, the tuberous form, the plains form. We have relocated that in our area now, just small populations, but we can multiply seed. I don't think it would be amenable to direct sowing, but it would make a great community crop. It would make a great planting crop. And we've done some planting experiments. We know a little bit about that now. Back into our restorations, so large populations of plants like Microceros, which may, of course, eventually allow us to have conversations with the traditional owners as well, and perhaps start to reintroduce cultural practice with important species like that, and also possibly cultural burning. Although already, of course, the local CFAs do a wonderful job of maintaining these areas as well. Very quick last shot. So that is the new site. That's the 2019 site, DELP-funded site. And so you can see there that is also rapidly establishing as an effective plant community. And our president, our secretary, our hero, vice president David Franklin, and our new treasurer. They just happen to be grouped there. That's only come about since the last AGM. That just photographs happens to represent that particular group. And I do thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for taking us to the end of our talks this afternoon. So we do have 10 minutes for questions. If you'd like to raise your hand if you're in the room. Joe, do you have questions online? Not yet. Okay. Thanks, Chris. Susan.
So this is a question to Christine. It was a great talk. Well, a great talk by everybody, by the way. It was very inspirational. But Christine, you inspired me a lot with thinking about 9 hectares of a mat of Grevillea renwickiana. That's insane. And the fact that you had a few plants that were flowering. So the question was, were the flowering plants different genets, and did you manage to get a chance to try and do some cross-pollination?
No, we did collect some flowers, and Gavin took them for analysis, but they were on the private property, but we didn't collect the flowers from the post-burn. So we didn't do any genetic analysis on those. So, could be on the card.
Yeah, so the Grevillea is unfunded and it's pretty happy chugging along by itself. We were very happy to see it flowering. Apparently it hasn't happened in over a decade. So I took out several people and yeah, we thought we may as well collect some flowers. There might be pollen in there. We haven't been able to have a look yet. It's on the never-ending to-do list.
Thanks, Erica. Yep, down the front here. Oh, sure.
Thank you. Yep, they were terrific presentations. John, I just had a couple of questions for you. One was the material that you scraped from the top, what happened to it? You know, so there was some displacement of material, and I was curious to know what happened to that. And also, was the land that you were regenerating, was that an encroachment by the previous people to farm it, or was it their land which they just let you restore some of it?
Depends who you ask, really, doesn't it? No, it's not their land. It's road reserve, so it was just social practice at the time. A cynic would say it was a social practice associated with some very, very detailed surveys that were being done at the time that were suggesting that these were important areas, but we won't sort of spend too much time on that topic. It was a local response. I think the people who do it are considered valuable contributors to their society, to their community. So you know, there are issues there. That particular, the old site, the original site, the council dealt with that spoil that was taken away by council. The next site, by then we knew we weren't going to be going any further, so we could simply push it onto the cropping land, which was quite well appreciated because it was nutrient rich, and that was fine. If we'd been able to continue up that road, I wouldn't do that because that would just double the weed load on that site. But yeah, so that's happened there. Our more recent work, we're just launching into now. The spoil is substantial, and yes, it'll be a combination of local landholders accepting it for fill, and there's also a recreation reserve in Wandoo that needs some fill. So we've sort of tackled that. Originally we thought, back in the very early days of this business, we thought we might be able to sell that as a valuable product for farm use, because it is high in nutrient as a general rule. So there are a whole lot of options, but the reality is it's a very expensive part of the process. So once you've got to lift into trucks and move the trucks and bring them back, it is a... Paul, in his work, was working on more open sites and could push the spoil to the side, and what happens there is that very, very quickly it dissipates into a almost impossible to locate area. It sounds like a lot of fill, but if you just push it, you can push it to the side, it doesn't, it very quickly settles down, and you don't have a long-term problem with it. He would then just sow it down to native grasses and maybe spray out or something if there were some broadleaf weeds. So there are strategies, but it's a good question, and it's an important part of the process.
Thanks, John. So Richard, and then we'll go to Joe with the online question.
Yeah, given that these cropping areas are so, valued in the community, how did you get the permission initially to do that?
David doesn't ask permission. He asks for apology. He apologises later. Oh. Okay. No, I don't know. I don't know the full history of that particular. In any real sense, 1.25 hectares is, when you think of the tens of thousands of hectares that they're growing under wheat and canola, and even along that roadside, 10k of cropping, the 1.25 wasn't difficult to achieve. But yes, I think apologising is probably a better strategy than asking in that environment.
Thanks, John.
This is from Steve online, and it's not a question, it's a comment to John.
Here we go.
Congratulations. Well done, John. You can now move on to the Western Grassland Reserve and repeat that success 15,000 times.
Could you ask Steve about rocks, please? Could you just ask Steve about rocks, please? I know you can't, but just ask him how to deal with rocks, because we do choose our sites carefully. And yes, look, his point is well made, and there is a huge and missed opportunity in the Western Grassland Reserve at the moment, because there's a lot of cropland there, and generally speaking, I think the cropland is viewed as the worst of the worst, and we view it as the best of the best, because it is where you can start from scratch. You can put back, at whatever complexity you choose, you can put back grassland onto those sites, and they then become a seed resource, and they even might spread out into the more difficult rocky area in due course. Can I just while we're on that, I just want to make the point that we went for a mix of about, we go for mixes of about 30, 40, 50 species. You can probably do the same, functionally you can do the same job with probably many fewer species, and it is a very, very stable community once you do it well, and you've got the rest of time to worry about diversity. I like to put diversity back initially, but if you're looking at the cost of this, seed is expensive, producing that seed is expensive, but it's a very resilient community once you build it, and you've got the rest of time to think about diversity.
Thank you. I think we've got time for 2 more questions, one here and then to Damien.
Hi, thanks. Katie from Landcare again. This question is for Christine and the whole room. In my bushfire recovery project work, the natural step on from that has been bushfire mitigation and prevention. And during this conference, it's come up again and again that the massive risk that a lot of these threatened populations are facing is if another fire comes in and wipes them out before they can get to that seed maturating age. I'm just curious, has there been a lot of work in the mitigation and prevention space of protecting these populations, like doing preventative work to start to reduce that risk?
Do you mean in situ? That in where the natural population
Yeah, where the plants
is?
are. Like,
not that I'm aware of. That's something that needs to be looked into further.
I'm just wondering if there's funding, if we're putting all this like fantastic funding of everyone in this room doing that doing that work, would the government be saving themselves money by also funding preventative work, even if it is just great if we could prevent it happening across the whole nation, but for those specific sites so that you don't throw millions of dollars into saving this species and then a preventative bushfire comes through and wipes out the whole thing and we do it again?
Yeah, just something
saving
like
time.
Like a cultural burn or a prescribed burn around. That could be.
Thanks,
definitely
Katie.
something.
Sorry to interrupt you, Christine. I think last question from Damien, and then we'll have the conference close.
Thanks, Amelia. Thanks, Jonica, for talking to us about resilience. I think it's great, and I agree. There's just so much to do, but it's good to have some strategies in place. I wanted to ask Sean, you've spoken to so many people over the last few years. It's been a hard couple of years for all of us for so many reasons. What's your secret for resilience? And what's inspired you from all these conversations?
What's been inspiring is how generous and hopeful and genuinely kind people are. I think, Damien, we were having this conversation. I think this group of plant conservationists are probably the kindest people I've ever met. And it's a strength. That kindness and generosity is a strength. And there's just not a lot of ego around. And that's it. It can also hurt, but that's okay.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sean. Okay, I have one exciting thing to do while Tony makes his way up here for the conference closing remarks. So Jonica has kindly donated 2 copies of her book as lucky door prizes. So there is one person in the room with a Talong midge orchid under their chair. I'll give you a minute now to get down on your haunches and find the Talong midge orchid. And while I do that, I'll announce that the second book is going to one of our online viewers, Kate Steer. Who's got the midge orchid? Damien. I put that. Congratulations. I put that sticker under the chair this morning about 8:15 when there were 2 people in the room. So yes, it is not rigged. And Kate Steer online, we will get your book to you. Maybe just drop us in the office your details. We will have them with the organising committee. I must remember that. Okay. If you have put up posters today, please collect them and take them home. The poster tubes are all with safekeeping at the registration desk. And I'd like to introduce ANPC President Tony Auld to bring the conference to a close. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Amelia. It's been a lovely couple of days. It's been so nice, and everyone's told me it's so nice to get back together in person. For those of you online, I hope you've been enjoying it and got some good feedback from people in the room as well and the speakers. I'd like to have a couple of announcements, if I may, before I say a few words. The first is ANPC has been very fortunate to get a grant from the Commonwealth's Environmental Restoration Fund. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. So we led a consortium in an application for their Environmental Restoration Fund related to the Threatened Species Strategy Action Plan, which is an action plan which deals with 30 nationally threatened plants in the country. We're lucky to receive funding of about $250,000 for a project about enabling future recovery of a Rhodomotus species by safe custody ex situ. So it's a really exciting opportunity for ANPC. They'll be working with a number of government departments in New South Wales, DPE, in Queensland Department of Environment, Science, Agriculture and Fisheries, Australian Botanic Gardens at Mount Annan, Blue Mountains Botanic Gardens at Mount Tomah, the Australian National Botanic Gardens in Canberra, the Dandenong Ranges Botanic Gardens and the Lismore Rainforest Botanic Gardens. So it's a range of partners doing a lot of great stuff and trying to use that particular species affected by a particular threat. The way the funding works, you get to look at one species, focus on one species, but the issue is there are many species now being affected by myrtle rust, and hopefully this will guide some of that other work and be able to integrate with the other work that's going on at the moment and promote that other work. So that's really great news. Thanks to Bob Mackinson for all his efforts involved with getting that money. I also would like to encourage anyone who may be interested in hosting our next conference. We have a conference in general every 2 years. This one's been a bit delayed by COVID. We've had a very kind offer from someone from Western Sydney University as one example for where we may go next time, but we're really keen to hear from anybody who's got any ideas or any options in their local area that they could help out in running a conference such as this sort of scale, hopefully post-COVID with maybe twice as many people as this in it. So if you've got any ideas, come and see me or Joe, who's sitting at the front table there, and have a chat to us. For the conference itself, I'd just like to thank you all for coming, both in the room and online. Thank all the people who've given great presentations. Thank all the session chairs who've helped out to kind of maintain things, and all the support we've got here at Albury. There's also one more thing. There's two more things. There's the field trips tomorrow, so I'm reminded again that 8 a.m, before 8 a.m, be here tomorrow, please. And we'll finish with the post-conference field trip on Friday. There's also, to get these things done and run, there are a couple of people who run around behind the scenes. You mightn't see them very much, you mightn't hear from them very much, but they do most of the work. I stand up here and talk, but I don't do anything really, except for stand up here and talk. So I'll get to talk to people as I wander around. So I'd just like to give a special thanks to some of those people and give them a little gift on behalf of ANPC for their efforts here. So if I could get the following people to come up on the stage, please. Joe Lynch, Christine Finance, Amelia, who's up, well, she was up here. Oh, she's here still. And Martin Driver. Thanks. And, yeah. And some warm thanks for all their help over the whole organisation of the conference and the running of the conference. It's now time for afternoon tea, so I'm not going to hold you up anymore. Thank you all for coming, and let's have a cup of tea and a chat. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.